Welcome back to serving as the senior pastor here at Brentwood Baptist. We're currently on what we believe with our everyday practice. And today I'm once again joined by Amy Jo Girardier. Amy Jo's been on staff with us for over 20 years, has served as girls minister and now women's minister during that time. In 2003, she published a Bible study entitled James, We get rolling into chapter 4 this week. One of the connections that you help us make again is that really there's a continuity out of chapter 3. So kind of let's get it running start. Again, James, half-brother of Jesus, early leader in the church, well-versed in the Old Testament, particularly the Proverbs. You see that influence.
Yeah.
But also connecting us to the New Covenant, in particular, the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
And so a lot of practical wisdom for the churches, the early church, and especially those who have been dispersed by persecution, famine. But James writes bluntly.
Yes.
He writes, unequivocally, and he gives us a lot of commands. And so he's going to step on our toes probably again this week a little bit.
Yeah.
But it starts with how we treat one another.
That's right. Well, and I thought it is really important. I know that as we're reading through it, when you see a chapter, sometimes we can think that there's a stop there.
Right.
But I think it's really good sometimes to look right above to see where he was just coming from.
Yep.
In James 3, 18, right? 19. He's talking about the fruit, peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. Then we jump into chapter 4 and he's like, what causes fights and quarrels among you? So he's just jumping right in at some of the things that are going on in the church and calling it out as he sees it for sure. So,
well, yeah, it's this positive, right? We need to sow peace, cultivate peace. And then he's like, basically, this isn't always happening.
That's right. That's right. So you get this idea of a push and pull between what's going on in the church. And I think you start kind of seeing two kingdoms emerging from that, right? So.
Yeah, the way you framed it up, the chapter in your book, and I love this, James doesn't use the word kingdom here, but it's clearly one of the biggest kind of these meta themes of the entire Bible, but the New Testament in particular, is the idea that there is and in this chapter, he's going to call it godliness and worldliness. So you've got the kingdom of God,
right,
which is now the kingdom of Jesus Christ, especially after his coming and incarnation, and that's the way that the language the New Testament uses. And then you have a kingdom that's diametrically opposed. You have the kingdom of the enemy, who seeks to divide, to discourage, to distract, to ultimately, when he wants to destroy the good work that God is doing in and among his people. So let's talk about that kingdom idea for just a little bit, because it helps us draw into focus this idea that is prevalent in the New Testament. If life's really a spiritual battle, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot going on. And I think sometimes we can get really, we may have talked about this earlier, but we can get really focused on the fact that Satan is attacking us, right? And it can be really exciting to really be like, oh my gosh, Satan is out there, and he is. But also there is a battle within ourselves too, right? The flesh is battling that sin nature, and that is, a constant reminder of, if you don't constantly go before the Lord and talk with him about what's going on in your heart, we can get so distracted by, Satan is doing this, which he is. But does that make sense?
Yeah.
But the flesh is, if I'm not constantly going before the Lord and surrendering my heart and saying, hey, I acknowledge that I'm sinning in this and I confess that, then I think our hearts get numb.
Yes.
We start doing cardiac drift. This is random.
I want to hear this story.
But this is just really recent. I have started training for a marathon. I'm going to try it. I've done 2 halves, but never a marathon. But I know it's going to be a whole year of just preparing for that. And so to have the best healthy outcome where I'm not going to burn myself out, I've started trying to train in zone 2. So I've done, have you heard about this before? Like
I have
zone
not.
2 training kind of has your heart training at long distances for the same amount of time so that you can endure. You can run longer. And you need to do speed work too, but I'm loving doing the zone 2 right now.
Okay.
But I have found, so I'm running like an hour at a time. And when you get up to 40 minutes, I have been maintaining that zone 2, and then all of a sudden, without any change on my part that I can see, my heart starts like speeding up, and it's really hard for me to stay in a zone 2. And so I started doing research because it was happening every time.
Interesting.
And so it's called cardiac drift. It's a phenomenon that happens for runners that your heart will drift to another. It'll speed up. It'll get out of pace. And as I was running, I was like, that's what our hearts do. It's that hymn, right? Where our hearts are prone to wander spiritually, but also physically.
Keep it in the zone.
Yeah, keep it in the zone. So anyway, I was just thinking about that I think we can have cardiac drift as Christians. And so that, how do you continually go for the Lord and say, okay, I want to be tethered. I want my heart to be tethered to you. Yeah. So,
well, you have to teach me everything about running a marathon because I don't think I'll ever run one. I always tell people I was a history major. Yeah. The 26.2 miles comes because the battle was won. The dude runs that far to tell him we won the victory. Yeah. And then he falls over dead.
I didn't realize that
because he didn't know about zones.
Yeah. He had no idea.
That was it. He didn't know about his cardiac zone.
One time, right?
And see, that was it. But you're training.
He was dead. Yeah. Training is important.
Absolutely.
So
no, you've got this, but no, there.
I hope I don't die at the end of this. Thanks, Jay.
No, you've got this. I promise. We'll pray for you. But endurance is an important part of it, and the idea there again about the zone, the heart is the idea is there's a lot of things that compete, right, the throne of our heart.
That's right.
And we know the answer should be Jesus and Jesus all the time, but subtly there's these other things, and to this point, the context of this in particular, it's why yesterday I mentioned in the sermon the U's in the Greek here are emphatic.
Yeah.
So when he talks about fights and quarrels, then he's like, don't they come from your passions or your selfish passions? You could kind of insert that there, that wage war within you. You're the one who you desire and you don't have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and wage war. Yeah. And so again, the point is that we want to look to, Satan's against us, and he is. Sometimes we're like other people against us, and sometimes they are.
True.
But the first place we always need to go is introspection, is to examine the condition of our heart.
That's right.
To be sure that Christ is enthroned on our heart. Yeah. And there's this interesting idea, and I think this really comes into focus when you think about quarrels and what we disagree over. We all have a version in our mind of how we think our kingdom should work, but really even how we think the kingdom of God would work if we ran it.
That's right.
In other words, if we were in charge.
Exactly.
And so, I hear this a lot with my kids right now because I have kids who are aged 24 to 8. So there's various opinions based on their stages of when I'm a parent, I'm going to run this little kingdom called a household different than you and mom do. As if they think it's going to be easy. And Tanya and I are like, I can't wait to watch you, try to run a household and all of the things that you have to manage, because we think at some point, if I was in charge, if I was on the throne of the world, then I would run things differently. Yeah. And you have a story in the book about you and your brother and actually your experience in empire building, but it was an empire of ants.
That's right. That's what we do in Illinois.
I mean, we have to entertain ourselves
have
somehow.
Like all the camps and stuff. So no, I'm just kidding. We did have this like a big. We put pickles in it, so I call it my pickle bucket. But anyway, so my brother was like, okay, what are we going to do today? And so we had a whole bunch of rocks and stuff. And so he put them into the bucket, filled it up.
10-gallon bucket.
Yeah. Filled it up with water. And then he went and got ants and put it on the thing. And then I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. We're making our own little island. And so we got brush and everything, made a great little paradise for these ants. And so they were all on there.
Their own little floating islands.
Could not,
their own island paradise.
They couldn't get off of the rock because there was water.
They would drown.
Yeah. And so at first it was really sweet, Yeah. And then we're like, oh, let's put rafts in there, see if any of them will be adventurous. We were trying to figure out if there was an explorer ant, and we named them. We got really invested. And then a guy from the neighborhood, boy from the neighborhood came over and he was like, this is really cool. And then he was like, I think there's other ants from other corners of the yard, and they were different ants. And so like he went and got ants and put other ants in. And so what happened was a war,
Yeah.
And so then it was horrible. But anyway, we realized very quickly we make bad rulers, And so, of course, my mom's like, what are you guys doing? Because we had all sorts of things. We got she's, when we were very occupied every day, we're like, oh, okay, we got to go out to the garage. She's like, what is in the garage? And it was Ant Island, she destroyed Ant Island. But I learned very quickly, what it looks like for us to rule this particular part, and we were bad. We were really bad. The ants died,
Yeah. It's harder to be a good ruler than you would ever imagine.
Yeah.
And so this gets at a key heart of the issue of what James is going to address here, and that's our pride.
That's right.
That we have to be able to humble ourselves before the Lord, because obviously that's the root cause of a lot of our quarrels, arguments, fights, those kind of issues. And so when you think about it, when it comes to our priorities, when it comes to our relationships, a lot of things come back to this root issue. And one of the things that you pointed out, Amy Jo, and kind of our notes for this lesson is that friendship with the world, right? That's one kingdom.
That's right.
But friendship with God is living for another kingdom.
Yeah.
And that kingdom operates differently than just what we would normally think in conventional wisdom or in just what we absorb from the world around us.
Yeah.
So we have to constantly be reflecting on the reality that, as you said a moment ago, if we're not careful, we will drift, and so I think it's interesting. There's a theologian, I forget who it is, but he says, nobody drifts into holiness, right?
Yeah, that's good.
We drift into worldliness.
That's right.
Because we just begin to unthinkingly absorb. There's that good word again. We just begin to absorb the values of the world around us.
Yeah.
And so
good.
I think it's really important that James really, really calls that out for us. And so I love verse 6, because I think, and you point this out in the chapter 2, it's so life-giving, right? It's this heavy, heavy moment where he uses this prophetic language to really say, listen, when you cozy up to the world, you're really cheating on God.
Yeah.
Like, let's call it what it is.
That's right.
Let's call it spiritual adultery. And so you have this conviction, this weight, this prophetic language that's sitting on you to say, you're right. So what do I do about that? How do I fix my broken heart?
Yeah.
And he says, but he gives greater grace.
Yeah.
And so we see, in a book like James, it's easy sometimes, I think, for us to lose sight of the gospel because there's so many commands and imperatives, and it looks like this. And that's for a good reason, because we need those practical handles and exhortations. But we always have to bring it back to the gospel. So this greater grace idea, I think it was Augustine who said, God gives what he requires, what he demands of us. And so even that isn't our ability to figure it out and to get it right. We have to receive the grace. Let's talk about that again for a minute, that grace, faith, and works kind of interplay. Why is that so crucial to our walk?
Oh my goodness. There's no way for us to earn our salvation, right? And so we're going to mess up continuously. And so you need that grace, right? It's more than it's going to cover over our sins, right? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah,
because I'm
absolutely.
thinking of right before verse 6, where he said, or do you think Scripture says without reason that the Spirit he caused to live in us envies intensely? I think in another translation it says that the Spirit is jealous. The Spirit
good.
jealously longs for us, and that bothered me when I read it. This will get to that point, I think.
Yeah, sure.
Because I thought jealousy is wrong, right?
Yeah.
And so the negative looking at, and I know we've got verses that are, or songs that say he is jealous for me, and there is a positive to that. But the way that I saw that, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but that Greek word, I can't even say it, but it translates to fiercely loves. And I loved that because that's a positive.
Yes.
He's not sinning, obviously, but for me, that was super helpful to remember that God fiercely loves me. And because of that, it's not like he knows I'm going to mess up, right?
Yep.
But his grace is more, and it's going
right.
to cover. And the fact that he fiercely loves me makes me want to be in relationship with him. It brings my heart back.
Good.
I'm drawn back. I'm prone to like, please, Lord, help me be in right relationship with
you. You
you.
tackled it. I was kind of flying by it, but I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
Verse 5, scholars will tell you is, because I actually took my Greek class, we had to translate the book of James.
Okay.
So verse 5 is one of the most difficult verses to translate in the entire New Testament.
Okay, great.
It's why there's different versions in
Yes.
English that use these words. But the theological concept behind it, some translations use the term jealousy, which is drawn from places like Exodus,
right,
where it says your God is a jealous God. Obviously, the important thing to remember is the biblical use of that word is not that type of jealousy is not our kind of jealousy.
That's right.
We envy in a worldly sense. We get petty, right? We covet in those sense. That's not what this word means. I do love the fiercely loyal translation because I think it's a better way for us to understand what that word means, both in the Hebrew and in the Greek. Because what it means is God knows that he can satisfy. He knows that any lesser God, anything else that we put on the throne of our heart, to our point about kingdoms, will ultimately let us down. It's a bad ruler. What does a bad king do? He takes from his people, but he does not give to them. Right? He just uses them to advance his power.
Exactly.
Our king is the opposite. Our king is the king who's a giving king. So God is jealous because he knows, right? He's envious for his people because he wants them to come to the only true good king that there is.
That's right.
And he knows any other false king, anything false that we place on the throne of our heart will ultimately let us down.
Yeah. And even, I don't know, I drew this, again, visual learner.
Yeah.
They can't see this right here, but I have this picture. If you look at, I don't know, if you look at verse 2, it says you desire and do not have, and then you murder and covet and cannot obtain.
The intensification.
Yeah, and you fight and war, and you ask and don't receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your evil desires. But all of that, like just what you were saying.
Vicious cycle.
Yeah, and you're left with nothing, cannot obtain. Don't receive. You spend it. There's nothing there.
Yeah.
And I love that because it does show what you were just saying, that that worldly kingdom is going to leave us empty and broken.
Yeah, I love that you showed us that because I think it's awesome the way that you process those things because I hadn't thought about it that way, but it really is. It's a vicious cycle, you know, and as we know, cycles, right? We draw them in a circle, but really what it means is we spiral down deeper and deeper into that hole unless there's an intervention.
That's right.
And that's where God's saying, I'm jealous for you because I'm the only one who can intervene and pull you out of that vicious downward spiral into quarrels. And that's why, right, it starts with quarrels and division and then ends in, it talks about murder. And as I mentioned yesterday in the sermon, I don't think people were literally killing each other in the church at this point.
Right.
But he was echoing Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, who says, right, if you murder, well, that starts with anger in your heart. And then if you walk it out to its, terrible conclusion, that's where you end up murdering somebody because the anger is overtaking you. Yeah. But it started in your heart. And so the way to break that, right, is to recognize God's grace is sufficient.
Yeah.
It's there for us and it's greater. It can overcome these things. It's the greater grace. It can pull us out of that situation.
So
it is beautiful. And so the antidote, right, is therefore submit to God. And there we have another one of your favorite Greek words. And so that word huptasso, I think is the way you pronounce it, that Paul uses, James also uses, and it means to place under authority.
Yeah, I love that.
And so that word picture of willingly submitting, right, to God and saying, okay, God, in my selfishness and my pride, I'm going to be stuck in the cycle. So now I want to submit myself to you and your ways. Yeah. And when we do that, resist the devil and he will flee from you. And that's another one of the words that you point out in the study.
This one was a little bit, I know there's probably, again, different ways to look at it, but antihistemi is the one, which I love that. We have people in our family that are highly allergic, and so they have to take an antihistamine every day.
I did not know this before you put it in the study.
Isn't it fun? I love seeing the root word. Obviously, it means to block, right? To oppose. It's also maybe a military term, but to stand, oppose, or block. And so when you see the word antihistemi or hear it, I think you can hear antihistamine. And just seeing how Because when you look at that, resist the devil, you're like, I can't do that, you know? But when you realize, going back even to the spirit that God causes to live within us, that's the only way that we're going to be able to resist the devil. Is because he is our antihistamine. I mean, that sounds not great, but he's blocking, he's blocking that attack if we submit, if we're surrendering, if we're
in him.
Yeah.
Well, it's important because we fall into ditches. I don't know, it's hard for me to say today when it comes to the work of the devil.
Yeah.
Like on one hand, we just sometimes pretend like he doesn't exist. And spiritual warfare is not real. You know, all we have is what's right in front of us. When we know the Bible reminds us of that truth over and over again.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, sometimes we ascribe almost too much power to Satan. You know, like there's light and dark and yin and yang and, you know, the good side of the force and the bad side of the force. But the reality is Satan is not God's equal.
That's right.
Now, us, we need to remember that he is powerful, right? He absolutely, his schemes, his ways, right? His all of his works, like they can defeat us.
That's right.
But he is not God's equal. Therefore, if we receive God's grace, it is greater to overcome the devil because God is greater than him. But we have to fight that victory in him. We can't fight it in our flesh.
That's right.
Or we're going to lose every time. So the way we resist, right, is by, ironically, submitting to God's greater grace.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That was one of the things that as I was looking through that, I wrestled with that. It was really encouraging to me. I love chapter 4. It's a lot. At first it was a lot to
There
take
is a lot in
yeah.
there.
But it's so encouraging as Christ followers. I'm just thinking of the church, how after they wrestled with this, how that would have been encouraging to them, you know? And then right after that, come near to God and he will come near to you.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most you know, precious promises there. That draw near is the Greek version of the Hebrew word for worship. So as we worship God, as we put him back on the throne of our hearts, and then the word picture in the Greek of the second part of that verse is he will draw near to you, is he will welcome you back.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
And so the picture of the prodigal comes to mind, you know, that story of the father waiting in anticipation and ready to welcome back the one, you know, who is willing to come. Again, it's us. We're the ones who've been in the far country.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's our hearts. We've been proud. But when we humble ourselves and come back to the Father, he's ready to welcome us back with open arms. So what a great promise.
Too,
he is a
right?
good king, and that's right.
It just goes back
better
to
than we deserve.
That's
in so many ways, because we don't deserve to be welcomed back because of all of the things that we've been doing as we've been cheating on him with our little idols, with our other false gods, with our distractions and our diversions.
Yeah.
So it's incredible. And then as that happens, right, the summary statement of that, of course, is verse 10, where he quotes Jesus, humble yourself before the Lord and he will exalt you. And then this next couple of verses, I didn't really have time to get on.
I'm trying to think
get into in the sermon yesterday, but he extends that to don't criticize one another. And that word really means attack, verbally attack. So we're back to the tongue.
Yeah.
And so he's not saying like, you know, constructive criticism. He's not saying, hey, brother, I'm not seeing enough fruit in your life. What he means is verbally attack one another because he points out that if you are to do that, right, if you defame or judge as a fellow believer, you defame and judge the law. What law is he referring to? Well, he's already called it out, right? He calls it the royal law.
Yeah.
Love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
And so if you are just wanting to verbally attack someone, then you're not loving your neighbor well.
That's true.
And it's God who gave us that law to love your neighbor. So therefore, he reveals for what it is, right? It's an attack on the creator. If you attack the created thing, the person, well, then you're attacking the creator who gave us that law. And so again, James just being penetratingly honest with us about that. And he says, who are you to judge your neighbor? So Amy Jo, does that mean we're never to judge a situation? Put you on the spot there?
Oh my goodness, I have to process through this for a second. Because I was just thinking about how I loved that it was saying royal law and we were talking about thrones and kingdoms.
Oh yeah, good connect.
Does that mean that we're never supposed to judge anybody? Is that what you asked?
It was. Well, so Matthew 7 was one, judge not lest you be judged, is like the verse for the current generation. Right. And they use it, they misinterpret it to say, man, you can't say anything about my life. Right. Which I think is taken out of context.
But that's different than, like you were saying, edifying somebody, right?
Exactly.
I mean, yes, you're right. It's not, it's not when you go, Oh my goodness, no, I'm not going to go down there. I was thinking of like in prayer time sometimes.
Oh yeah.
And you can for sure, judge people, or I'm sure that's happened before, not at Brentwood Baptist, but no, it's there is something about when you look at somebody's life. We have a mentoring program right now with our women, and so they're invited in to see what's going on, and so but it's not judging, it's edifying. It's saying, hey, I've noticed that this is
back to the condition of your heart.
That's right.
So when he says judge, it doesn't mean that we're not to evaluate, for instance, the fruit in people's lives, or to be constructive and edifying, and even sometimes rebuke, because it has a godly intent behind it, to be able to say, hey, let me use James 1 imagery. Let me hold up the mirror for a second.
That's right.
This is what you say you believe. Are you believing it? What I want to be careful is, I think sometimes we take these judge verses out of context in our culture today, and it's like, you can't judge me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, that's not what these verses are saying.
That's good.
What it's saying is no. You don't judge out of a heart of self-centeredness, out of a heart of pride, out of a heart that seeks to elevate yourself while you put somebody else down.
That's good. Yeah.
All right. And then this last section, and James is going to get, again, practical with us.
Yeah.
And he says, come now. And I love those little, rhetorical flourishes he gives us. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we'll travel to such and such a city and spend a year there and do business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. So he uses the example of a first century traveling merchant who's got their travel plans. They've got their wares that they're going to sell. They're going to make some money. They're going to earn a profit. And so is there a problem with making plans, with earning money? Is there an issue with these things?
No. And you did such a great job yesterday with the mist. I was like, I love that. I've been thinking about that with the, and you talked about this yesterday, but no, it is that whole thing. I'm a visual learner, so I'm always thinking of, I don't know how this will end up, but I'm thinking visually. My life is going this way horizontally. So how am I inserting the vertical? How am I intersecting what is going on with God? I was even thinking about this yesterday with, we'll jump into the conviction part, but as I was leaving church yesterday, I had to do some parenting moments, and probably because my child had 5 donuts yesterday.
Shout out to the Deaf Church, their 30th anniversary.
Yes, we were so thankful for all the donuts.
3,500 donuts.
That's what. We ended up eating lunch in the same space as them.
You ate donuts for lunch too?
No. We went to a chicken place afterwards, but we were like, we've had 5 donuts, so we were so thankful for them for a lot of reasons.
Yes. But kids have their way.
But the donuts
one, and
do
then they'll grab
kind
another
of,
one, and
I don't know, it speeds up the sin cycle sometimes, Anyway, so I was thinking about some of the conversation that we had, and I thought, I want to make sure in parenting that, because you can reach out in so many different ways and try to do what you're doing, and just intersecting Christ, right? Like making sure that whatever we're doing, making plans, whether we're planning, whether we're parenting, whether we're living our life, it's what you were saying of inserting God, making sure that we're making him Lord of that moment, right?
Yeah. Well, even your horizontal vertical axis makes a cross.
Right, exactly.
And so it's that constant reminder of that's supposed to be our king.
Exactly.
And so, clearly the Bible, the whole counsel of Scripture speaks, especially in places like Proverbs, that obviously James loves so much, about the wisdom of, storing for hard times and planning and, those kind of things.
Yeah.
So, and the Bible says, and we'll get into it more next week as well as we talk about James chapter 5, but money in and of itself, God knows that we need it. He provides for us, right? He wants us to be able to work hard and earn a living. There were examples in the New Testament of people sitting around on their hands, and they were called out for that. Yeah. And so work ethic is important in the kingdom as well. So clearly those aren't the things he's speaking against, but to your point is, I think horizontally speaking, we can just totally fix our eyes like blinders on the things of this world and say, well, here's the next thing I got to do. Here's the next responsibility. Here's the next thing to make money. And in all of it, we totally forget the vertical.
That's right.
We leave God out altogether.
Yeah.
And that's what James is cautioning against. That's what he's saying, that we can live with this presumption.
Yeah.
My predecessor, Mike Glenn, I didn't work this quote in yesterday, but I thought it was just so good when he used to call, right? I remember in one prayer, he said, Lord, forgive us for the arrogance of time management. arrogant.
Oh, wow. That's good.
Just the idea that like it's arrogant to just presume,
that we're going to do, and it's going to go exactly how.
Exactly. And I really thought, what a profound statement to make. And it was, because again, I'm one of those guys, work ethic. I mean, we both grew up in the Midwest. I got my list of chores. I'm going down them, and I will. If I'm not careful, I'll miss the God moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's what God, James is saying is you've got to put God first. So that's why he says, instead you should say, if the Lord wills.
That's right.
Now, in my research, I found that it was a common saying in that part of the world, if the gods will it.
Oh.
And so James is baptizing that a little bit and using the term that they used for Jesus, that's like Kyrios, good. Lord, right? So no. It's not if the gods will it. It's if the Lord wills it, then we will do this and that. And so it's just this little gut check. So sometimes I have to find myself saying that, we've got these plans to this, and it's be like, if the Lord wills,
that's right.
But it's just a good every day.
He's on the throne of every moment. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's good. Acknowledging that he's on the throne of every moment. That's an incredible takeaway, because I use the little spray bottle as just an example of this mist, because it is, we tend to elevate our self-importance, and we have a world that feeds that.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Thousands of commercial messages a day come at us in every way, trying to elevate our own self-importance, really to turn us into a consumer.
Yeah.
You'll be somebody if you look like this, if you buy this product, if you have this experience, if you go to this place. And of course, none of us really think that on the surface, but yet it's a subtle deception that puts us in the middle of the story, puts us on the throne instead of God.
And in that moment, we think these people are really going to be remembered forever. It was hilarious yesterday when you were asking about the 18th president.
Yeah.
And then it was LeBron James came from No, it wasn't LeBron James.
Yeah.
But
Ulysses S. Grant fought the Civil War, became president during Reconstruction, and this kid, doesn't remember him, but we remember the guy playing basketball right now. But then he'll be forgotten, and he'll be replaced by somebody. It's just a sobering but humbling reminder that no matter how famous, important we think we are not the center of the universe. God is.
That's so good. Daryl, we were having a conversation the other day, too, about making sure that we even are looking at things like, what is this going to look like in 10 days? What is this going to look like in 10 weeks, and whatever. And making sure that we realize in that moment, right? If the Lord is Lord of every moment, making sure that we're inviting him into that process as we're planning. So, I love that.
Yeah, it's so good. And so, he lands on this. He says, as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil, so it is sin to know the good and yet not do it. And it was funny because that was another one of those verses that I thought, whoa, that's kind of a left turn. But if you think about it, it really isn't. Because what he's talking about there is the sin of omission. We spend a lot of time talking about the sins of commission, the things that we know we're not supposed to do, and yet we do anyway. But here he's basically saying, if you make assumptions about your time, if you fill it all up with your horizontal world, then you're not going to have time to do the things that you're called to do.
That's so good.
And I think, and a lot of times that's where we find life's greatest blessing, life's greatest adventure, is when we realize, whoa, God, this moment isn't just about me. It's about how you have intersected, this moment for your glory and to show me something and to allow me to be a part of it. And we miss those moments if we are so busy with our planner and our schedule and our constant alerts and reminders about the little mini kingdom that we're building for ourselves. We miss those God moments in which he says, hey, why don't you participate in what I'm doing? Have you left any space for that? It's convicting to me.
It is. And then if you think about planning and then you're just, how some people lose purpose and they're looking for purpose. Really, the question is, are you just looking at your calendar and you're just boxed in? You're just looking at, I'm getting through this day, I'm getting through this day. And one of the lies that I think Satan really uses on us is, if I find myself doing this, if I can just get through this, then, something I'll find rest, or I'll find peace, or I'll find time. And so I think sometimes that that's a little way that that Satan will trick us into not doing the good because, I don't have time right now.
I don't have any capacity.
Right. But if I just get through, and so
there's a little meme that went around a couple years ago that said, working in a church means saying over and over again, next week things will slow down until you die. Right? And I think every
so
parenting
true.
you could apply it to any job, right? But every week we think to ourselves, if things would just slow down, right?
Next week I have time.
Next week, next week. You say it over and over again until you don't have any more time. The point being, again, we have to submit ourselves to God. Our schedules, our time, our priorities. We have to put Him first in those things. And so I think the convicting thing for me, Amy Jo, again, thinking about the kingdom, I think Matthew 6:33 says it so concisely: seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and then everything else will be added as well. I think for me, that was my core conviction. And you would think, being a pastor, somehow it's easier for me, but I can fill my schedule with to-do lists and feel boxed in just like anybody else. And when I do so, really what that is a form of pride. And so I have to be willing to constantly submit my plans to the Lord as well and look for where He's at work, to quote Experiencing God, so I can join Him in what He's doing instead of trying to say, well, God, here's my agenda. Now you slap your blessing on it and we'll be good.
Yep. No, that's great.
Yeah. Any convictions or challenges for you? I know you said you love chapter 4. What are the things?
I think for me, it just goes back to that continual, am I making space to submit, my heart regularly before the Lord? And when I'm running, everybody has different prayer closets or spaces or whatever. So I don't love running, but I do love running before the Lord, right? And kind of like Chariots of Fire, I feel His pleasure when I'm running.
There you go.
But I'm not really great at it.
That's all right.
But that's when the Lord just begins to speak in my heart. And so when I haven't been making space to do that, I do feel mission drift, heart drift a little bit. And so it was convicting for me of just how I want to make sure that I'm coming near and scheduling time to do that, right? So weekly, your predecessor, Mike Glenn, obviously, he used to say, he may have done everybody this way, but he told me, do you have something on your calendar where you're meeting with him? Did he? I mean, I'm sure that he said that all the time. So Fridays, from the moment that he told me that, 23 years ago, I started blocking off Fridays as my Sabbath day and not letting anybody interrupt. And so there's special time throughout the week that I'm making sure that I'm drawing near to Him and submitting myself to Him. But sometimes things drift in, right? So
that's right. And so to have that protected time to say, hey, I need to evaluate what's crept onto the throne of my heart.
Who's on the throne right now?
Or if I've drifted right out of the heart zone,
true.
And I need to be sure that I'm where I need to be. Those are great insights, Amy Jo. Thank you so much for being on with us. It's been really fun to have you. We'll have you on again in the near future as well.
Yay.
And so it's been another great study as we walk through James. We got one more chapter to go. And so that's it for today's episode. I hope you found this conversation helpful. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with a friend. It's a simple way to invite others to engage in what God is doing through our church. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week.